Hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Simon and today I am back with my January reading wrap up. I know we are about a week into February. I'm a little bit behind already in 2025, although how is it that January is the longest month on record, like it's literally its own year, and then suddenly we're already a week into February? I don't get that. What's that all about? Can somebody explain that to me? Anyway, before we move into February, I want to have a chat with you about all the books that I read and a couple of books that are DNF'd in January. So we're going to get cracking. I have talked about this first book that I read in January already, as it was one of two books that I included in a first 5-star books of the year video. I'll link that down below because I won't talk about this book for as long as I did in that video. It's Dusk by Robbie Arnott. He is one of my favourite authors. That's one of the reasons that I chose Dusk as my first read of the year, because I'm quite superstitious about it, and I kind of put quite a lot of emphasis on however I feel about the first book of the year. That's my reading year. Well, my reading is going to be a corker because this was absolutely incredible. It's about twins who are in their mid-30s and are quite well known around the land because of their infamous parents, and they're living on the breadline, well, worse than the breadline, and they hear about a bounty for a puma called Dusk who is killing shepherds, and so they decide to capture. Now, this book has a timeless quality. You can't quite work out, sometimes not even where quite in the world is, let alone what time it is. It's got this western feel. I know I called it a country and western. That's my love of music, because someone pointed out, and it's very, very true. I loved that about it, and it reminded me that I do really like books with a western flavour. So if you've got any recommendations for those, please let me know. But we follow these twins who are very much outsiders as they try to find this puma and the communities they end up going to, and just this world is built so brilliantly. But as it is built, and as we get to know more about the twins, this tension really builds, and Robbie is saying so much about outsiders in this book that I think is brilliant. And this has, I think, possibly the best ending of a book I have ever read. I was literally on the edge of my seat. Well, I think I was reading it in bed, and I was just absolutely hooked, and then just bawled my eyes out. In fact, I cried twice in this book. It really had me at hello. So that is Dusk by Robbie Arnott. Absolutely brilliant. Then I picked up Midnight Beastiaries by Bagoo, who is a writer, well, a poet and novelist. No, well, I'm hoping there's a novel coming from Andre. If he sees this, you know, Andre, that I want that novel. But he's written a short story collection, which is one of my favourite books. Was it last year or the year before? Absolutely loved one of his previous poetry collections, and have loved his essays. And this I thought was brilliant yet again. His poems are really emotionally raw. Some of them are incredibly sexy, particularly the first couple in this collection. I was like, ooh, getting hot under the collar here. But I just, loved how he played with form as well, particularly in this last poem, which goes on like, I say it goes on quite a while. I don't mean that in a critical way. It's a good thing. It's The Creature in the Flowers, and it kind of is written in a really different way, and the way it falls over the page and the way words start to build and repeat as the chapters of this poem go on, and there's even images within it. I love that, and I have a few of his other collections where he really plays with different forms. I don't want to say materials. What's the word that I'm looking for? Mediums. Yeah, I love this. I was really shocked as well to discover that I had an acknowledgement in the back of this. That really moved me, especially after I've been very moved by that final poem. I just thought this was ace, and if you haven't read any of Andre's books, then please do. I am going to reread his essay collection at some point, because I read that way too quickly when I first got it, just because I was inhaling it because I was enjoying it so much. But it has made me also kind of want to head back to his short stories and to his present. I don't often say I want to read things, so that's quite interesting. But yeah, I thought this was a great poetry collection, my first poetry collection of the year. There was a lot of firsts in the first 5 books because it initially happened accidentally, and I was like, no, I'm going to be a bit more I guess directional with my reading, but I just wanted something. I had a not very nice incident at the beginning of January, which I've talked about in vlogs if you want to find out more about that. And I needed a book that felt like real comfort, and Giant by Mollie Ray looked like that from the cover, because it's, you know, 2 beings giving each other a hug. This is quite unlike anything I've ever read. In essence, it's about a family who one of the children, one day just grows up giant and there's something clearly not quite right. And so it's really looking at how a family deals with somebody becoming seriously ill, particularly a sibling as we go on. And there is not a single word in this graphic novel.
It's all images. I'm trying to get that example actually.
And so you are going through these images, and just the way that it tells the story so beautifully just really, really got me. I thought it was absolutely incredible. I think it won an award quite recently, and you can totally see why when you get to it. But also what blew my mind, this is all done in biro. Like that literally, I was quite like, my jaw droppeth when I discovered that. And I just think it's so beautiful of Mollie Ray to be able to convey everything that she does through this book and through a biro. Just wow. And I can't wait to see whatever she creates next, because that was really, really, really good. Then something completely different, but like I said, I decided I was going to read my first novel, first poetry collection, first graphic novel, first short story collection, and first non-fiction within the first week-ish of the month. And so my first short story collection of 2025 was Eliza Clark's She's Always Hungry. I have meant to read both of Eliza Clark's novels, both Boy Parts and I want to call it Penzance, and that's totally not what it's called. Why can I think of the title of that?
Oh my god, why is it stuck in here? I find it. Boy Parts and
Penance, not Penzance. Anyway, is it a setting? Moving on. This book, I was super duper intrigued to head to because it's giving like Wicked vibes. You've got the green hand, you've got the pink bathroom. It's so Glinda and alphabet coded. I thought, right, this is going to be right up my street. And indeed it was. Now, at the beginning of the book, and it's something that I'd seen Mercedes mention on her channel when she was talking about this a while back, there is a note that says, if you want to know the trigger warnings in this book, for there are many, head to the back of the book. Now, I decided not to because I was like, well, one, I just want to see how I feel about, because I knew it was kind of horror-ish, a horror-ish collection, and might possibly test my boundaries. But I thought, no, I'm ready for this. There is quite a lot of body horror in here, a lot of very unsettling, triggering things. What I will say is I went and read the triggers at the back after, and it does give away a lot of the plots of the stories. So just putting that out there. I don't want to give too much away about each of the stories, because one of the things that I loved about them is how they, I'm not going to say they twisted, but each one of them completely surprised me. And the range and scope of these stories is incredible, because we have like contemporary settings, although we go all around the world, we go into the future, we go into space, we've got vampires, a whole gamut. And I really overall loved this. There was one story that went on a little bit too long for me, which involved blue goo in your body. And then there was another one which was set in Australia about two young men that I wanted to go on a lot longer, because I felt that there was still more to be said. But other than that, I found pretty much every story kind of perfectly formed, which is not something I say often. The theme of these stories is all about hunger, and a lot of it is about food and why someone might be hungry. It can also be hunger for belonging, or it can be hunger for discovery, or it can be hunger for power, or it's just so well done. She plays with form, and that's something that I meant to mention. One of the short stories in here is told through website reviews, and I thought that was brilliantly done as well. I described this to several people as brilliantly batshit, and I mean that in the most complimentary way, because that's the best way to, like, if I was going to do a 2-word review of every book, if that's ever going to happen, then that would be my 2-word review of this. Brilliantly batshit, and I cannot wait to head to her novels. I think I'm going to start probably with Boy Parts. Oh, I forgot to say as well, sorry, going back to Dusk, this was my read for the Savage Reading Challenge prompt for January, or the first prompt, or whatever you want to call it, which is to read a book with twins as main characters. And I hadn't realised that when I started it. I remembered that they were siblings, I'd forgotten that they were twins, so that was a brilliant way to start the prompts as well. And the reason I've just been reminded of that is because the non-fiction I picked was perfect for the read Good challenge, which Ben Reads Good has set up, and for January he has done Annuary, so you can read a novel by an author called Annie, and I picked up, you can read a book by, because this is non-fiction, I picked up Annie Ernaux's I Remain in Darkness, which is translated from the French by Tanya Leslie. And I picked up a couple of Annie Ernaux's books after she won the Nobel Prize, and then decided that she was too big brain energy for me, and I probably wasn't clever enough to read her, and I wouldn't get it. But I thought, well, this is short and sharp, so I'll just give it a whirl. I absolutely love this. Love seems like the wrong word actually, as I say that, now that I'm going to talk about what it's about. But this is diary entries over a few years that Annie Ernaux's mum was in care, as she had, is it dementia or Alzheimer's? And what kind of floored me with this book was the raw, unflinching honesty of it. So there are moments of utter, pure, raw, unflinching love for her mother, utter, raw, unflinching grief for what's happening, really frank moments where she talks about the burden that her mother is. And as someone who has cared for people when they have been terminally ill, you obviously don't want them to die. But there are points when you know that they're not happy or really sick and really poorly. I'm trying not to get emotional about this, but and you kind of want them to go for them. But there is also the reality of the stress of being a carer and how you do want to sometimes have distance. And I just think the way that she covers this, plus also gives glimpses of other things going on in her life, which I believe are in other books. I just thought, yeah, it was so raw. And that just got me, and I was just, I just thought this was absolutely incredible. I have a girl's story, but I think she mentions a man something or other in here, and so I was wondering if, because she mentioned another of her own works in this, that's the one that I should head to next. But let me know if there's something else I should read. I know people really love the Years. Any Annie Ernaux recommendations, let me know those down below. And I really recommend this, and I'm really grateful to the mild panic that I had about not getting to Ben's prompt for leading me to read this, which was short. And so I've sort of box ticking, but it was a really good result, if that makes sense. But I did have a bit of a word myself, because like, you shouldn't be, that's not how you should be reading to prompts. Anyway, that said, I think that word with myself also led to a couple of DNFs. The first of which, and I'm so sorry mum if you see this, because this is the book that you got me for Christmas, but it's 365 Poems for Life, compiled by Allie Esiri, and it says an uplifting collection for every day of the year. And I got about 13, 14, 15 pages or days in, and reading one a day wasn't working for me. I realised that's not how I like to read poetry. I don't have to read a collection in a day, but I like to be able to just go at my own pace and see what happens. So that kind of was a bit jarring. Also, I think I'd only found maybe one of them uplifting, and actually only enjoyed one of them, which was a poem by Jackie Kay. So I will definitely be heading to a Jackie Kay collection at some point. I have to say, and this is no fault of mum's because she wouldn't have known this, I have tried Allie Esiri's compiled works before, because she did a poem for every autumn day, a poem for every winter day, spring day, summer day, etc. I think I only ended up reading, did I even read all of the autumn one? Her taste in poetry is not my taste in poetry, and whilst it is eclectic, the poems that she's putting forward, they just don't sing to me. And that's not any diss to her, because I know people read these and absolutely lap them up. But well, you can't lap it up, can you, if you've got to read one a day? It's quite a long experience. It was insightful to learn what sort of poetry I don't like, and it was also insightful to learn how I like to read poetry. But yeah, this wasn't for me, so that was a DNF, as was, still got where I got to, because I got quite a long way in, I got about halfway. But I bought this after seeing The Nickel Boys, and then wanting to read, the only other book by Colson Whitehead that I had on my shelves, which I've still got, and I can see it over there, is Crook Manifesto, but that's the second in a sort of unofficial series after Harlem Shuffle. And I went to my local Waterstones because that's the nearest bookshop I have in walking distance. If I could walk to West Kirby every weekend, it would be lethal. And they didn't have Harlem Shuffle, they had a few others, including The Intuitionist, which, having looked at all the blurbs of the books of his they had in stock, this appealed to me the most. This is about the first black female elevator inspector in an alternate kind of New York, in an alternate kind of 1850. And that just really appealed to me. I mean, I'm quite scared of lifts, so I don't know particularly why I was drawn to that so much, but I loved the premise of it being about this first female black elevator inspector who, after inspecting one elevator, then something dreadful happens to it, which nearly leads to someone's death, and it's clear that she's being framed, and so this becomes this real noir novel. But the reason I ended up DNFing it was that I just found it incredibly dense at points. Like, this is a novel where there's not much room to breathe, and that's like both in terms of there's not many paragraphs and whatever, but also, which is not something I'm a massive fan of, I like breaks to kind of, I don't know, pause, think, take a breath. But I just found also it was cramming way too much in, and the perspective shifts a few times, and that really threw me, and characters were introduced and then we would go back and forward into a story from a different narrative, and so it just wasn't quite working. And it did remind me that I overall remember, I mean, I loved The Nickel Boys, the book, and I thought the film was absolutely phenomenal. I really, really hope it wins an Oscar, because I just thought that was brilliant. And like I said, it made me want to read more Colson Whitehead. But my previous reading experience of him was The Underground Railroad, which I remember really loving the first half of, and then not being very sure about the second half. So it might be that, sadly, Colson Whitehead just isn't for me. I am going to try Harlem Shuffle, though, and we'll see how we get on at some point. So maybe that isn't a DNF forever, because I might keep that around until Harlem Shuffle sends me in one direction or t'other with him. Anyway, let's crack on to a book that I did finish, and that is one of my most anticipated reads for 2025, Sweat by Emma Healey. I loved Elizabeth is Missing by Emma Healey when that came out. I also really enjoyed Whistle in the Dark. Her novels previously can be described as unintentional literary thrillers, because they are literary novels with a thriller-like element. So with Elizabeth is Missing, it's about an elderly woman who knows something is missing. She knows something is wrong, and so the mystery is what is missing and what's going on. And then Whistle in the Dark is about someone going missing. And yeah, this is what I would describe as a revenge thriller. So in this book we meet, how have I forgotten her? I want to say Cassie.
I instantly second-guessed myself, and now I'm not going to be able to find her name. So we'll just go...
Cass. It is Cass. Why do I doubt myself sometimes? Ye have little faith in oneself. Is a personal trainer, and she's in the gym one day, and her ex turns up, who they were in an incredibly toxic relationship. He was really controlling, and he is blind, and so he doesn't know. It's been a while since they were together, but he doesn't know that she is going to be his gym instructor, because there's also a bit of a confusion over who is going to be his trainer. And so she is in this incredible position of power, and this looks at abuse of power and control in really, really uncomfortable ways. I struggled at the beginning of this, because I was like, I just don't like this concept of somebody manipulating a blind person, no matter how awful the things they have done in the past. But as you go on and you read more and you find out about the condition that he has, you do get very, very, very... But I think this is purposefully done, because it just makes you do that when she can have so much power, and the possibilities for revenge are so high, because no one at work really knows her that well. There were occasional moments where I was like, that's a bit too coincidental, or I'm not sure. There was a few ick factors, like I said, and shuddery moments. Overall, I flew through this. It raised a lot of questions for me. It made me feel really uncomfortable. Well, I'm not going to say any more because I don't want to spoil anything, because of course, having mentioned that it's kind of a revenge thriller, you know, there's going to be twists and turns and things are going to go on. I'll always read whatever Emma Healey writes. So that was that. Then I read The List of Suspicious Things by Jennie Godfrey. The paperback came out, so the paperback was everywhere, literally everywhere. And I was like, oh, I need to get to this. And this, along with this, were both books given away by the Women's Prize at Women's Prize Live this last year and this the year before. So I've had this for a while and meant to get to it, because from everything I'd heard, it was giving me Joanna Cannon's Trouble with Goats and Sheep vibes, which is one of my favourite books, but also possibly held me off a bit because hearing a book is very like a book you really, really love. I can't speak for any of you. Quite literally, I can't, because you can't answer me back and I can't talk through you and I can't predict what you're going to say to what I'm just saying. But I get quite defensive and a bit flinty about books. Like, if anybody tells me you've got to read this because it's the new Rebecca, I'm like, I don't think so. So I was a little bit nervous about this. This, to give you an idea of what it's about, this is set around the time of the Yorkshire Ripper, which I know Mum can really remember from her childhood, and the terror that this man had, not just over Yorkshire, but just over the country. We meet Miv and her friend Sharon, who at the start of the book are 12, and they decide that they are going to try and work out who Jack the Ripper is. Not Jack the Ripper, the Yorkshire Ripper is. But in doing so, start to become suspicious of people and start to list reasons for their suspicions. And what I enjoyed about this particularly, and I enjoyed the book overall, but what I enjoyed particularly about this was it does look back, and I feel bad comparing the two of them now, but I've started, so I'll finish. I liked how, as an adult reader and having these young protagonists, Jennie Godfrey very skillfully will make, I don't know, there's conversations they overhear or things they see that as an adult we read and take very differently to them. And I find that something that is, when done brilliantly, like really, really, really hooks me in. I don't tend to like young narrators. I tend to find them quite precocious and a bit annoying, but I didn't in the case of Miv and Sharon. And I loved the complexity of their friendship, and the same with the people that live nearby that they interact, some who they become suspicious of, some who they take off their list of suspicions. I think one thing I struggled with a bit is that, and I get, in my head I get this because if I was to write a debut novel, I would want to cram everything into it, and that's one of the things that I do love about debut novels, because they're just buzzing with everything. But I felt like almost every single household around these characters had somebody who was a outsider or a stereotype of an outsider, be it that it was someone of a different race, so it would look at racism, be it a woman who had an affair, because it could look at that, etc, etc. And sometimes I felt like that was being slightly wedged in when it didn't need to be, and I think this could have been a tiny bit slighter and would have had just as much impact, if not possibly more. But I really loved all the characters. Well, I love to hate some of the characters in this book. It really came alive. There are a couple of times I was like, I get it's in Yorkshire, but why do they drop their accent sometimes, and why does it suddenly really strongly come back? That's just like a minor thing, because overall, I thought this was, again, very much like Sweat, a book that just hooked me, and I whizzed through it. I'll be eager to read whatever Jennie Godfrey writes next. So yeah, I recommend that. Obviously with a few caveats, but I do recommend it. Then onto a book which was firstly recommended to me by Jane Rawson, who is another of my favourite Australian authors. And then I was reminded of by the lovely Katie, who left a comment describing it as being a combination of two books that I absolutely loved in 2024. In fact, they were two of my top 5 books of the year, and that is Clear by Caris Davis and I Who'd Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. And the book is Astrea by Kate Kruimink, and I had, like I said, heard about this through Jane, and then Kate, why am I repeating myself? I'd heard about it through Jane, Kate reminded me, and so I was very, very excited for this, and of course slightly worried that, oh my goodness, if it's been compared to two of my absolute favourite books, is it going to be everything I want and more? And this was brilliant. This is set on a boat, and where it's going from, we roughly guess, is either Ireland or the UK. And it's heading, I assumed, because Kate is Australian, to Australia. And we meet these women who are on there, and it is predominantly women with men who are manning the boat and who are, I don't really want to say looking after them, because they're not. But it's a very confined and quite claustrophobic book. I don't like books, well, that's not true. It's becoming less and less true. In my head, I don't like books set on boats, and I think it's because of the confinedness of a boat, which actually does make really good fodder for a book, but also that expansive sea. The sea freaks me out, basically. You just don't know what's underneath you, do you, frankly? Yeah, at the same time, I really want to go on a cruise ship. Me and Mum keep saying we're going to go on a cruise, although me and Mum said we were going to Sri Lanka, but she went to Sri Lanka without me. Moving on. I totally get the comparison with I Who've Never Known Men. I sort of get Clear as well, because it's, I guess, that rugged oceanness, even though it's an island and Clear, not a boat. I thought this was so gripping, and I loved the way these women had so many different complex relationships between them, whilst they also were having to, rather than necessarily wanting to, come together because of the situation they found themselves in. There's a huge unknowingness around the book, and I don't just mean the sea and the unknown depths of it, but I guess that is also maybe a symbol actually that I've just suddenly realised. Wow. I thought this was really, really great, and I'm thrilled that I have another of Kate's books on the shelf.
Which I now, of course, can't see, even though I thought I literally just had it right next to me. But I'll be heading to that very, very soon.
And I've seen she has another one which looks like a brilliant historical novel as well. Also, I should say this won the Weatherglass Novella Prize, which was judged by Allie Smith. So, I mean, how many recommendations do you need? You've got Jane Rawson's, you've got Kate, who commented. I'm assuming it's not the actual Kate who wrote this. You've got me, and you've got Allie Smith. So there you go, get reading this. And also you've got a bit of historical artifacts at the beginning. So it's based on a true thing, which I always love. I, very naughtily, did not include this in my last video, which was my January book haul, because I was sent it from the lovely folk at Granta in January. So apologies for that. I have talked about it already, as it was the other of the two books that I mentioned in my first 5-star reads of the year, so I won't go into too much detail again here because I talked about it for quite a long time there. This is A Room Above a Shop by Anthony Shapland, and I have been I was going to say hunting, but actually going back to what I was like, I've been hungry for a queer book set in rural somewhere, and this is one such book. I've got a few more on my TBR, so I'm very, very excited, because if they're as good as this and they chimed with me and just got me as much as this one did, then I've got some corking reads ahead of me. In this book, we meet B and M. They meet in a pub, and there is like a tension between the two of them. Then neither of them are openly gay because it's the 1980s, it's rural, as I mentioned, and through like glances and then a started conversation, they basically agreed to meet out in the Welsh wilds, and from there we follow their relationship. And this book, firstly, it's in vignettes, which is absolute savage catnip. Secondly, whilst it isn't a book that's about nature, although it's about human nature, the Welsh countryside and landscape is very much continually on the periphery of the book, even if it's not always mentioned. And I don't know how Anthony Shapland has done that, but he definitely does it, and that's something that I didn't mention when I talked about it in that previous video, how much this feels like it is a book about human nature and rural nature, and how animalistic that is, and therefore how that can make people maybe behave, because there are some animalistic shenanigans that go on here that I thought was brilliantly done too. Very nice, very frank, very raw. Raw is not a pun-ish. I found this incredibly moving, deeply upsetting. I do get a bit frustrated, I guess, with queer stories having sad endings. This book is so brimming with love, and I don't want to give any spoilers, that I forgave the sadness that is in it. I thought the way it looked at how the AIDS situation in the 80s, which was, I guess, mainly sort of focused on cities, but how the ripples of it affected people who were, or queer people out in the countryside, but also people in general, and how suspicious people became where they might not have been because of all of the propaganda that was going on. I thought that was just, there's so much in here that I absolutely loved. If you know of any other rural queer stories, I want to hear about them. Then I have another recommendation that I read, and I'm very grateful to one of my lovely patrons, Jamila, who at one of our book clubs, where every quarter we talk about our favourite and least favourite books of that quarter, and then we also do a favourites at the end of the year and least favourites at the end of the year. Anyway, one of the quarterly ones, she mentioned Brandy Sour, which is by Constantia Soteriou, translated by Lina Protopapa. And this is set in Cyprus and is mainly around this one particular hotel in Cyprus, which has been a pinnacle of Cyprus, but also pivotal in Cyprus's history, both as being a place for the rich and famous. It became a place, well, during the war, it had another history. And through drinks, but also this hotel, we meet all walks of life through decades of Cypriot history. And I just thought this was brilliant. This book is teetering between 4.5 falling into, well, falling, do you fall into a 5-star? Do you fall up to, whatever. It's so on the cusp of being a 5-star. Not that I really do stars, so actually that's pointless. But this, I think, will be in my books of the year. It's from a small indie press called Foundry Editions. I've already bought book 2 from them because this was the first book that they published, so I'm going to read them in order. And I'm just very, very excited about them. And this was perfect for Kayla of Books and Lala's Buzzwordathon cover prompt. Sorry, I should say the cover prompt was a pattern on the cover, and all the covers that Foundry Editions do are just lovely and all very different, but all based around patterns to do with the books in some way. It's very short, sharp chapters, quite vignette-y, and yet you just get so much of the characters and so much of the history and so much of, oh yeah, I just love this. I thought this was really, 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 really brilliant. Then I picked up on Lunar New Year, Dim Sum Palace by X Fang. Dim sum is my favourite food of all foods. I could eat it every single day, unless I'm not allowed. This is basically about a young girl who dreams that she is turned into a piece of dim sum when she goes to a dim sum restaurant. I don't really need to say any more than that. Other than that, it was beautifully illustrated. It's an absolute treat. And I have one of my best friends coming very, very soon with 2 small children, and I'm going to read this to them over and over before we actually go and have dim sum next weekend. I just thought this was great, a real treat of a book. And I've got a few picture books that really, like Charlie Cook's favourite book is one of my favourite books, and this is falling into that category. I may have to buy another copy for the kids that are coming to say, because I don't think I want to part with this, which was initially my plan. I thought this was lovely, just as a bit of a change. Then, from a very short book to an absolute chunk of a book that I read because I was interviewing the author for the most recent Women's Prize Book Club, and that author was Sarah Waters, and I was pinching myself that I was going to be doing it. Fingersmith is a book that I have meant to read for years. I've tried a few Christmases in the past to read it, and then somebody will give something away about it. I'm not going to give you any spoilers in this video, and if you want to talk about twists and turns, for there are quite a few in this book, but one particular big one, please say some jargon before you talk about it. But that twist, I will simply say, made me do the biggest gay gasp I think I've ever done, and it was in the bath, so it was echoey. Anyway, because of the bathroom looks. Moving on, I think this may now be my favourite historical novel ever, which is quite a thing to say, but I just loved it so much. I have been a fan of Sarah Waters for a while. I haven't read Tipping the Velvet yet. That's the only one of her books that I've left outstanding, just because the TV show is so ingrained in my brain, because particularly Anna Chancellor, who I just thought was amazing in that.
You exquisite little tart.
How do I describe this book without giving any spoilers away? I kind of don't want to. It opens where we meet Sue, who is an orphan. She's living with the pickpockets of London, in Victorian London. I mean, I love a book set in Victorian London. This is just dripping in Victoria on it. And also it's so gothic. And she basically becomes part of a plan to rob someone of their inheritance, in essence, and so has to go and pretend to be a maid in a big old house.
Not maid, sorry, to go and be, not the housekeeper either. What's it called?
Lady's maid in this big old house. So you've got tricksters, you've got Victorian Britain, you've got a big old house, you've got Gothic galore, you've got all of that, and then this epic twist that happens that I'm not going to spoil, and then they keep on a-coming. And I thought this was just incredible. I feel like loads of you will have read this, if not all of you will have read this already. If you haven't, get to it, because it is brilliant. Also, it's just so salacious. Not salacious, is that the right word? Sensual. It is salacious in a lot of ways, and sensational and sensual. And all the and Sarah Waters was an absolute joy. But ultimately, another book that I read for an event that was the same week, and this was a reread. Piglet by Lottie Hazell. I interviewed Lottie in Oxford at the end of, I was going to say October. I mean, like I said, January did feel like it was pretty much an entire year, but I do mean at the end of January, in Oxford. That's maybe where the O in October came from. And this is all about Piglet, who we meet when she's just not long moved in with her fiance into their new house. And their wedding is not far away. And one night he reveals something shocking. And we follow on the countdown to the wedding as things spiral, or unravel, maybe is a better term. And this book really looks at Piglet's relationship with food, her relationship with her family and the class around food as well, and how she's cooking to cope and feeding to sort of find her place. It looks at friendship in a really, really brilliant way. Very, again, unflinching, which is something that I really, really love, and the complexity of friendship and how we change and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I've really, really, really enjoyed this even more on a reread. So maybe I should be rereading more, but let's all move swiftly on. And heartily recommend, if you haven't. It is a real darkly delicious treat, because it has got some real dark layers to it, which is what I meant to say actually also about the list of suspicious things. One thing that Jennie Godfrey does brilliantly with that is the layers of darkness that our narrators aren't aware of as much as we are, and the peril therefore we feel, or the uncomfortableness that we feel. And I think Lottie Hazell does that with Piglet as well. So we have that. And then last but certainly not least, because this I thought was pretty blinky and brilliant, for Patreon Book Club for February, but I read it on the last day of January, we read Lie With Me by Philippe Besson, translated by the one and only Mollie Ringwald. I thought this was beautiful. There is a caveat I'm going to mention towards the end, but let's just focus on the moment that I'd finished reading it. This is all about an author called Philippe. Funny that. And he is, during an interview, he spots somebody he thinks he recognises, and then realises is the son of a boy that he used to know. And then we discover that him and this boy, when they were younger, had this secret, I don't want to say clandestine, I don't know, but I do, clandestine relationship. And we go back to that relationship, what happened, the ripples of that, and then him meeting his son, and I shall say no more. I read this and just thought the prose was so concise but crystal and clear and beautiful, and it is a book that lingers and haunts and really makes you think, and especially with what's going on in the world at the moment, and looking at how queer people are being well, let's not go into it because I try not to bring, I don't know, it's really tricky with just going off on a tangent with a channel like this, because obviously I am a political person, reading is political, but sometimes I'm aware that people want to come here for escape from all of that. But suffice to say, around the world, queer people's voices are being silenced and their lives are being questioned. And this book is a reminder of how that was not so many decades ago, and how far we've come, although we've not got anywhere near where we should, and we certainly seem to be going backwards a little bit. But again, I want this to be a safe space where people can escape from all that if they want to, but know that I do think about this a lot IRL. But that I thought was really, really powerfully done, and just the power of words and letters that really came to the fore. Now, the caveat that I have is I then watched the film a few days later, and I don't know if it's because of the cover of this book, but when I was reading it, it felt very black and white. Like, that makes it sound like I'm going to say monotone and dull, and I don't mean that, but it came to me like a black and white movie. Then I saw the film and it's so vivid and full of colour and it's quite different in the storyline. They don't stick to necessarily the same things. Well, maybe it's, although it does give a big spoiler at the beginning, I will say the movie, so do head to the book first. But I do, in now, looking back, feel much warmer towards the film, which I, again, loved, 10 out of 10, than I do the book. So weirdly, this book was like a 5-star after I read it. Then I watched the film and it dropped to a 4.5. Oh, and also because instead of just saying the word penis or cock or willy, I don't like that word, or anything like that, the amount of times it's referred to as his sex made me want to vomit in my own mouth. That did give me the ick when that happened. And thank you to Kira, one of my patrons, who's going to read it in French and report back as to whether it is his sex in the original French or whether that was a translation thing. Because if it was, Mollie, shame on you. So there we are. We finished on sex, or his sex. Let's just say. I hope we're all doing super duper well. I'd love to know if you've read any of the books that I read in January. This is going to be possibly quite a long video. I should have told you to grab a couple at the beginning, but then you'll have seen how long it is from the thumbnail. But I'm not going to edit it too much. I am going to be back to doing wrap-ups in 2025, because I know for the last few years I've been very on and off, hot and cold, fickle, some might say, with them, and a bit wimmish. Well, that's the only way that I am wimmish, because I don't seem to do, although I have read quite wimmishly. I'm going off on a tangent because it's getting towards the end of the video and I never know how to sign off. But I would love to know any of your thoughts if you've read the books that I've talked about, whether you loved them too, whether you didn't like them, whether you loved the ones that I didn't like so much, although there weren't really many of those, and any recommendations based on the recommendations that I've asked for. Leave those in the comments down below. We can carry on the conversation. That'd be lovely. Subscribe if you'd like, and if you want more Savage Shenanigans, you can head to my Patreon, my Blue Sky, my Instagram, my wish list, and all those good things. I was very naughty. I said I would read books that I was bought from my wish list within a month of or so of getting them, and I didn't read any last month, but I will this month, I promise. But yeah, that's it from me, and I will see you in another video very, very soon. Bye.